Hello everyone and welcome back to the 87 Gaming channel. I am Feck and today's video is going to be all about Tracer, our favorite Overwatch hero. And first of all, let's just get this out of the way. I'm certainly not the best or anywhere near the best Tracer player or Overwatch player. This guide has just been created because the topics that I want to discuss have been kind of specifically and repeatedly requested by my fans and people who view my streams. Much of what I have to say is really just my opinion. It's based on my experiences, and it's pretty likely that some of my opinions will not be in agreement with the general consensus. Similarly, the following guidelines are what I've found to work for me, and it's entirely possible that not everything that I suggest will work for you. Let's talk about my credentials for a second though. At the time of this writing, I have over 500 hours of competitive Overwatch gameplay experience, and over 300 of those have been on Tracer. My peak SR is about 3869, and I've played hundreds of games with and against Masters, Grandmasters, and top 500 players. Outside of Overwatch, the first-person shooter has basically been my favorite genre forever, starting way back with things like Doom or GoldenEye, and I would say I have tens of thousands of hours playing first-person shooter games, and I've even gone to some MLG tournaments way back in the Halo 2 days. Now that we have that out of the way, let's talk about Overwatch and, of course, everyone's favorite hero, Tracer. That's why you're here, after all. I will begin with some of my suggestions for best practices with Tracer, and then we'll move on to some more subtle nuances regarding how to play her. After that, I'll touch on some more general Overwatch advice, including the often requested topic of how to climb in rank, and I'll give you my perspective on that. So, let's get down to business. Stay alive. The first and absolutely most important concept that you must grasp if you want to elevate your personal skill is this: stay alive. I've said this on countless occasions during my streams, and it will continue to be my #1 answer for everyone who asks me how to improve. I understand this may seem a little too basic for some of you, but really I urge you to hear me out. Dying is the absolute worst possible thing that you can do. A lot of people tend to assume that dying is not all that big of a deal, and anything lost with that death should be offset by just a single elimination, right? No, this really couldn't be more wrong. Dying has major consequences, and a single death at the wrong time can be the difference between winning and losing a game. So as you can imagine, having many deaths makes this situation exponentially more likely. Dying is very bad. Now, why does being alive matter so much? Well, it's because of the value it brings to your team. Look, even if you're not tearing up the scoreboard with eliminations, it's such an immense thing to stay alive that it's almost impossible to quantify. And remember, with Tracer, she's a high mobility flanking hero, and she has the ability to do really high bursts of damage. If she's alive and she's in position, she's a very dangerous threat, and she's one that the enemy team must acknowledge and choose how to deal with. Just by being potentially deadly, she has the ability to make a strong impact on the flow of battle by influencing the moment-to-moment decisions of the players opposing her, and she can do this without even firing a shot. I have, on countless occasions, been able to pull 2 or 3 players from the enemy team away from the team fight or the choke point, and just to deal with me, chasing me around corners and giving up strategically valuable positioning. This allows my teammates to engage with a clear advantage in a team fight, and the longer that I can stay alive and remain a nuisance, the greater advantage my team has. If the enemy team chooses to ignore me, I'm free to go to work on the enemy's backline, which is where Tracer is most effective. Either way, you bring immense benefit to your team, and you can only do this while you are alive. Know the map. Another deceptively simple piece of advice that I regularly offer is this: know the map. Now, intimately, like every health pack, every blind spot, every flank route, every vantage point, every dead end, and every shortcut that you can. And I don't mean to imply like a general knowledge here. The more specific, the better. Theoretically, you should be able to navigate the entire map running backwards without getting hung up on any walls or corners or other obstacles. I urge you to try it out for yourself. Pick a realistic attack or flank path on any map and try to run it backwards. For increased challenge, use blink as often as possible while doing so. Now, consider every single time that you get stuck to be a death, because in a combat situation, that is exactly what it will be. Fortunately, This aspect of playing Tracer is more a matter of practice and memorization than skill. Anyone should be able to learn the maps, and all it really takes is practice and repetition. This will allow you to engage and disengage at optimal times and maximize your overall damage output while minimizing your deaths. This is a really critical part of playing Tracer with maximum effectiveness. As a hero with very limited range who relies on burst damage, an out-of-position Tracer is a pretty useless Tracer, and that's where her mobility comes into play. She lacks the vertical flexibility of heroes like Genji or Sombra, but she can use her blink ability to traverse areas quickly and to reach various vantage points on nearly every map. Take advantage of her speed and your knowledge to stay one step ahead of your opponents at all times. Decision making. Probably the most underrated aspect of any high-performance Tracer player is just excellent decision making. Things happen very quickly in Overwatch, and when you are constantly on flank paths, behind enemy lines, and blinking all over the place, it becomes increasingly difficult to keep track of your surroundings, your priorities, and specific enemy threats, like which abilities are on cooldown and which ultimates are likely to be used next. You must be able to observe, process, and react to the situation on the battlefield using your experience and game knowledge to not only make the correct decision, but you must do so without hesitation, time and time again. And while this can be tremendous and overwhelming for new players, as you put in hours and you gain experience, you will be able to more accurately predict the flow of battle and draw on your experiences to play the situation to your best advantage, which is good. Because the alternative is to make a bad decision, and making a bad decision on Tracer, whether it is when you engage, or which target you choose, or the path you take, or when to use your abilities, it almost results in death almost every time. As the hero with the lowest health pool in the game, Tracer is really fragile and very easy to kill for nearly every hero. Even stray fire not intended for you can end your life instantly, and in this way especially, Tracer can be a very unforgiving hero to play. For the most part, Tracer will either be the easiest or the hardest hero to take down in a team fight, and very rarely anywhere in between. In the end, you must rely on your experience, your ability to read other players, and your instincts to give yourself the tactical advantage as often as possible. Abilities. Tracer has exactly 3 things in her toolkit: Blink, Recall, and Pulse Bomb. Knowing when, and when not, to use these abilities will make or break you. This becomes even more crucial as you climb to higher tiers, and the margin for error slims to minimal. Blink. Blink is used to cover ground quickly, most often to close the gap on a target or objective when outside of combat, and to dodge enemy attacks while in combat. For this reason, it is important to have as many blinks available as possible when you begin an engagement. On a basic level, in lower tiers of play, Tracer's blink rhythm is pretty predictable. Shoot, blink, while you're reloading, shoot, blink while reloading, shoot, blink while reloading, and then recall. But at higher tiers of play and against more experienced players, this becomes pretty easy to track and deal with. Furthermore, once you've burned your cooldowns in this way, you're sitting duck and you're waiting for them to come back, and you're very easy for target for your enemies. If possible, you can give yourself an edge at the end of the fight by simply holding on to blink during the first reload, especially if you're taking little or no damage. But there are many other ways to use your primary abilities besides this, and I'll provide a couple of my most used examples. A slightly more unpredictable rhythm, and one of my favorites, looks like this. You shoot, you blink directly behind your target without turning, you wait a split second, and you blink back to your original position. At this point, you've already done some damage to your target, and if timed right, they should be turning away from you to where you originally blinked past them, while you are now aimed directly at them, preferably the back of their head. Finishing them off should be relatively easy from here, and you will have one blink and recall available in case they are needed, and sometimes they will be. If timed correctly, you can even blink past them yet again, and then recall back to your original position. At this point, your target should be a bit confused, but they will also probably be aware that you are out of tricks. You've got nothing left, and if you are still unable to secure the elimination at this point, you are probably going to die. It's sort of on you to decide whether the risk is worth it. If the elimination is not likely, and especially if it's not on a critical target, it may be a better use of your recall and your remaining blink to simply disengage. Another example of higher tier blink usage in combat looks sort of like this. You blink, 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 you shoot, and then you recall. And the point of this is to just dive the enemy. I mean, you could also blink, 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 pulse bomb, and then recall. And you're trying to pick off a healer or some low HP target while giving very little opportunity for the enemy to get you. This will have a much lower success rate than the previous method, but it is best used as an opening to a team fight and not necessarily to secure an elimination. If nothing else, it will divide the enemy team's attention between you and the front line, and that can force mistakes or create openings for your team. Think of it as more of a low-risk gamble with a huge potential payoff. And these are just two of my commonly used blink patterns. Really, there are countless possibilities for a Tracer with a full set of cooldowns, and the only real limit is creativity. One very important note that I must address before we move on is Blink's greatest flaw. Now, it is very audible. Tracer gains the most value from her engagements by getting close to the enemy and catching them by surprise. Any experienced player knows exactly what an enemy Tracer blinking sounds like, and virtually any hero in the game can quickly neutralize an incoming Tracer if it's on a predictable flank. If there's no rush to reach your target, it is highly recommended to walk slowly or even crouch walk as you get within striking distance. Giving away your position before you initiate your engagement exponentially increases the risk of failure and death. Recall. Unlike blink usage, which is a mixture of science and art, recall is much more of a gut instinct ability. While it can absolutely be used in conjunction with blink patterns in an offensive engagement, recall's primary function is to keep you alive. And for this reason, you should save recall for emergencies and only use it offensively if you are very confident that you will have no trouble staying alive for the following 12 seconds. As you become more and more familiar with Tracers through practice, knowing when to recall becomes much more intuitive and natural. There's really no correct amount of health or exact parameters for using recall. The best time to use it will always sort of be contextual. However, if you are in the middle of a hectic firefight and suddenly hear Tracer gasp, that's an indicator you're at about half health. And if you cannot safely predict what will happen in the next few seconds, using recall is probably a good idea, as it's better safe than sorry. That said, there are many occasions when you can comfortably push yourself to much lower than half before using recall. A good example of this would be, say, dueling Moira, or a low charge Zarya, or some other hero who's putting out consistent but not necessarily high damage. These kinds of fights are often won or lost on a razor's edge, and pushing down to 20 or 30 HP before using recall could easily be the difference between securing the elimination and being sent back to respawn. Conversely, sometimes it's appropriate to recall even at full or near full health. Now this might occur if you are diving on an unprotected healer when suddenly, say, an enemy Roadhog or McCree shows up, or maybe both. These kinds of heroes have the ability to instantly eliminate Tracer even at full health, and the ability to kill her very quickly even when those abilities are on cooldown. Anything other than the immediate use of recall in this situation is dangerous at best, regardless of HP. Another time you might use recall at full health is if you lose your ideal positioning, usually the high ground. Let's say Lucio or Pharah knocks you into the hole in the center of the control point at Oasis University. It may be a good idea to recall back to the point immediately just to contest or to assist your team, rather than taking the critical 3 to 5 seconds to return to the point by running up the stairs. Another important thing to remember is that the damage indicator patterns are relatively unique to each type of damage. While subtle at first, this is an invaluable tool for gauging how much damage you can expect to take and how much time it will require this type of attack to finish you off, especially in situations where the incoming damage is unexpected. This is a skill that can only be learned through experience, but it is an invaluable one. Pulse Bomb. I'm of the opinion that the ability to reliably stick pulse bombs is really the biggest difference between good and great Tracer players. The damage and elimination discrepancy between a player who constantly nails their targets and a player who constantly whiffs is actually quite considerable, even if all other aspects of these two hypothetical players' performance is identical. Pulse Bomb is one of those abilities never really expected to be a game winner, but it absolutely can be. The problem is that, unlike most other ultimates, Pulse Bomb is dependent not only upon good decision making, but also player skill. Also, unlike most other ultimates, you rarely want to wait for that perfect moment. Feel free to use it as soon as the opportunity presents itself, or better yet, make finding the next opportunity your priority. Use them as often as you can. If nothing else, it's good practice. The only time I hold on to my Pulse Bomb is if there's a Zarya on my team with Graviton Surge ready. And I must admit, sticking pulse bombs is one of my weakest areas of playing Tracer, and I'm constantly trying to improve in this category. But that said, I'm more than happy to give you the best advice I can on the subject. Now, your main goal is to get as close to your target as possible. It would really be best to think of it as melee range. So imagine that Tracer doesn't really throw the pulse bomb as much as she tags the enemy with it. If you're not in melee range, you probably miss, and if you can get this close safely and follow your target as you throw, you should stick them. Really, the hard part is getting that close without dying. The best approach in this regard is a subtle one, as the enemy is much less likely to dodge or block if they don't see it coming. Another thing to keep in mind is that pulse bombs are not ideal for use on tanks, and without considerable follow-up damage, most tanks will survive just fine. And finally, it is perfectly acceptable, sometimes even ideal, to use pulse bomb to eliminate teleporters, shield generators, Orisa's supercharger, or even Torb's turret, if it's during a team fight. Focus on self-improvement. How do I climb? That's the question I get all the time, the million-dollar question. How do I climb? Now, this part of the guide is not specific to Tracer, but this topic gets brought up enough in the comment sections of my videos and during my streams that I felt I should really dedicate at least part of this guide to climbing. Now, before I begin, I feel obligated to mention that if your only motivation for playing competitive is to increase the rank next to your name, you're doing it wrong. You will find very little value in playing this way, have very little fun, and have very limited growth. The competitive experience is about exactly that, the experience, and not the rank next to your name. Regardless, most players are far too obsessed with rank and give this silly number far too much value. Don't be that guy or girl. Don't play just for the rank. Furthermore, always remember that rank is just an approximation. It's not a perfect formula, it's just good enough to get most players into a fairly accurate range most of the time. If you climbed to Master and then fell to Platinum, you didn't just play amazing one week and then become suddenly much worse a month later. Like, much more likely scenario is that you are a diamond-ish player on average and just had some extreme luck on both ends of the spectrum with matchmaking roulette. This is not really unique to you or to anyone else. We all have highs and lows, occasionally dropping below our true performance level and occasionally peaking at ranks that we really don't deserve to maintain. And now that I've explained exactly how I feel about rank and encouraged you to do the same, I can tell you exactly how I climb. I don't focus on climbing, or at least I do my best not to. Instead, I focus on self-improvement. It is incredibly natural and easy for people to lose a game or a series of games and blame their teammates or lag or whatever other excuse. Break this habit now. Stop worrying about teammates you can't control. This may or may not be, why you lost. But is blaming them going to benefit you? Is it going to help you climb? Is it going to help with anything? No. And no matter how well you played, how great your aim or your decision making was, or how clutch your play of the game was, or how many medals you had, you also made mistakes. Every person, no matter how talented or experienced, makes mistakes. You can't just say to yourself, "Oh, I got gold medals," and assume you should have won. First of all, the way that players value medals is similar to the way that they value rank, and they give it way too much weight, and it prevents them from seeing the bigger picture. Please don't be like that. Focus on what you could have done better. Every win, every loss, every game. This is the only thing you have control over, and this is what you need to focus on. Every time you die, every time you flub an ultimate, every time you miss a key play, you must ask yourself why. And you must commit to not making the same mistake again. If you are asking yourself this question as often as possible and answering honestly, you should continue to grow as a player and as a teammate. If you are constantly blaming your teammates or your bad luck or your connection speed or anything other than yourself, you will find that you stop growing as a player and most likely stop climbing in rank. Stay positive, always do your best, and never stop trying to improve. I really hope you enjoyed this guide, and I would love to know if it has helped you in any way. Don't forget to come by and say hello during one of my streams.